Welcome to episode number 322 of Destination Linux. Destination Linux is a video podcast from the Tux Digital Network. If you're new to the show, Destination Linux is a podcast perfect for all experience levels. Whether you're brand new to open source or a guru of sudo, this is the podcast for you. My name is Jill.
I'm Ryan.
And I'm Michael.
And on this week's very special and amazing episode of Destination Linux, we have one of our heroes on from Linux. We will be interviewing Mark Shuttleworth, the CEO of Canonical and the company behind the development of the Ubuntu operating system. All this and more coming up right now on Destination Linux to keep those penguins marching.
This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by Linode. Visit linode.com/tux. That's linode.com/TUX. And see why over 1 million developers trust Linode for their infrastructure. From their award-winning support, offered 24/7, 365 to every level of user, to the ease of use and setup, it's clear why developers and businesses have been trusting Linode for projects both big and small since 2003. Linode offers the industry's best price to performance value for all compute instances, including shared, dedicated, high memory, and GPUs. Linode makes cloud computing simple, affordable, and accessible, allowing you to focus on your customers, not your infrastructure. Visit linode.com/tux to create a free account. And as a member of the Destination Linux community, you'll get a $100 60-day free credit when you become a member of Destination Linode. Maybe you just want to try something new, or maybe mess around with some new projects that you've never tried before. Linode is a great option for that. Their simple, affordable, and accessible Linux cloud solutions and services makes this a breeze. In fact, you can use their nodes to build everything yourself, or use plenty of Linode's one-click apps from their app marketplace to deploy everything from Plesk and WordPress to Valheim and Minecraft servers. So go get started on Linode's awesome cloud platform by going to linode.com/tux. That's linode.com/TUX. This week's feedback comes from Alyssa. If you want to send in your own feedback, you can go to tuxdigital.com/contact to send us an email. Or you can join our forum at tuxdigital.com/forum. Also, you can find us on Discord. If you want to hang out with the community, game with the community, or just chat about Linux, tuxdigital.com/discord. So Alyssa says in her contact message, I wanted to just thank you for existing, and in particular for having Jill as one of your hosts. It often feels like tech is not super welcoming towards female enthusiasts, and being able to tune in every week and hear Jill's perspective makes me feel like I'm actually welcome in your community, which you are, of course. And she goes on to say, thank you. And also, Jill, you're awesome.
What an amazing message. And I just want to add, before I let you respond, Jill, to such a beautiful message, that when you see Jill at scale, which we've been able to attend twice now, you quickly realize how much Jill's presence means to so many people there. And when they see her, they light up like a light bulb and like, Jill! And they run over and try to
like literally he's not exaggerating.
I'm not,
it is like the lights in the room somehow become brighter, and then the connection of them just running to each other to give a hug. That happened both times we were at scale.
It's like in a world where there's so much negativity, I know what Jill has meant to this show, bringing so much positivity into it, what she's meant to me personally. And Michael and I have talked about this off air together, that like Jill has helped make us better people. Just her positivity through everything. Her work with Linux Chicks of LA, her voice being heard throughout the tech community inspires so many people. But she's also a huge inspiration for my daughter, who never misses an opportunity to gush over Jill when she's on the screen. In fact, I was talking to somebody else in the podcast, and my daughter heard a female voice on the phone, and she was jumping up and down going, is that Jill? Is that Jill? Is that Jill? I was like, no, it's not Jill. It's someone else. Because she was just so excited at the potential to talk to Jill. And every time she's on the screen when we're watching a video and she sees one of the YouTube videos out there with Jill, she just freaks out. And I realized how powerful that is to my daughter to see someone like Jill, someone like her, another female like presence there on the screen talking about tech and being a tech enthusiast and being who you are. So I just love this email and want to take a moment to kind of say how much not only is mean to the community, but to us too, Jill.
Yeah, and I want to also take a moment so that you can feel more uncomfortable with how much praise you're getting, because Jill, you're the best. We sometimes joke about Jill being scary and intimidating, and we're afraid to talk bad about her and stuff like that, and that's true. But I just wanted to say that, Jill, you're a wonderful addition to the show, and I'm happy to call you a friend. And Ryan, on the other hand, though.
Yeah, you're okay, Michael.
Oh my God. You guys, I am so overwhelmed and I'm blushing and I'm honored. It has been a privilege to be here on Destination Linux. I feel like it was my life's work to eventually end up here and be
That's
with
awesome.
you guys. And we have become such dear friends. And it's so wonderful being able to see you every year at scale.
It's a game changer.
It really has drawn us even closer together, and I just love you guys for that. Your kindness, your enthusiasm in the community, just everything. I love both of you, Michael and Ryan, tremendously.
Love you too.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Alyssa, for your kind words. That just it made me cry, and even my husband, he teared up a bit when he read that.
Oh,
Yeah.
so awesome.
Yeah, we've already told this story before, and maybe Alyssa has heard it, maybe not. But I just wanted to make it clear, like, it's kind of interesting how you talked about how some of the female enthusiasts don't get the attention, and that's a shame. But like with Jill, it was kind of funny because when we were deciding whether or not to add another host to the show, we went through many different people, and no one fit what we wanted at all. Like, they were good people.
You're not telling this story right. If we're going to tell this story, I need to tell it. I told Michael we needed another host on the show, someone to bring something
that's fair.
different.
And I said no.
And I kept mentioning names, and he would be like hardcore no. Like, I would find these people, no. And I said one time, what if I could get Jill? And he was like, you can't. But yeah, sure. If you can get Jill, sure, of course. Let's get Jill.
Yeah, of course.
But you're not going to get Jill. And I called Jill, and Jill's like, yes. And I'm like, got you, Michael. We got Jill. So that's kind of how that whole story went down. And it's been amazing ever since. And it was the best decision that I made for the show.
It's the best decision that you... Okay, it's the best decision we made. It's the best idea you've ever had, and my best decision in terms of listening to that idea.
Yes,
how about that?
Yeah, she did a good job on that. All right, so we've got an amazing interview coming up, but my second best decision was to switch all of my passwords over to Bitwarden. This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by Bitwarden. Get started right now with your free account at bitwarden.com/tux. That's /TUX. A password manager software allows you to have peace of mind knowing that your online accounts are secure. Bitwarden provides you with the tools to store all your passwords in a secured vault, auto-generate those passwords and usernames for you, and even automatically fill those passwords into the login form so you don't have to. You can access your data across many types of devices, web browser, mobile apps, desktop application, even the command line. And the best part is, and what differentiates Bitwarden from everything else, is it seals and encrypts your private data with end-to-end encryption before it ever leaves your device, so you know you're the only person with access to your data. Go to bitwarden.com/TUX to get started. And did I mention it's completely free? But you're going to love it so much, you're going to want their $10 premium account, which comes with a gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F, and Duo, Vault Health Reports, Bitwarden Authenticator, priority customer support, all for less than $1 per month. Are you kidding me? Bitwarden.com/TUX to get started. And thanks to Bitwarden for sponsoring Destination Linux. Today, we would like to welcome Mark Shuttleworth to Destination Linux podcast. Mark is the founder and CEO of Canonical, the company behind the development of the Linux-based Ubuntu operating system. And Mark's been to space. Mark, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's amazing to have you here. I think Jill's about to burst out of her skin. She's so excited. So you've got a lot of fans here, but we want to start with your origin story. We've got a lot of new listeners. This podcast brings a lot of the new people in Linux into it, as well as the experience. So for a first-time guest, want to know your origin story. What was your first experience with Linux?
Well, I was a student in the 1990s in Cape Town, South Africa, right in the far, far, far tip of Africa. And the internet was just making it down through the continent, had just sort of arrived in the country. And so as a student, I was kind of playing with what was possible. And I found myself a little limited by the proprietary platforms that were available. And someone gave me a stack of Slackware disks. And from there, I kind of made my way through a bunch of distros and found Debian, which was very early in those days. And it was missing an Apache web server package. So I made one of those and became a DD. And then, I did a bunch of stuff with Linux. Couldn't really believe the generosity and the intellect and the excitement of the open source community. It was just such a wonderful thing to be part of. And so that ultimately led me to want to be part of that in a more meaningful way, which led to Ubuntu.
Amazing.
Oh,
awesome. It's so interesting, Slackware, and then people giving out like copies of this. When we ask this question to so many different people, it's always a very similar story with individuals of how they got into Linux. And I wasn't a part of that world because I came into Linux way later, once Linux was absolutely easy to install, super fun to use. I was kind of completely
he's
spoiled.
A noob, Mark. That's what he said.
I'm more of a noob of everyone here. and I hear these stories and I'm thinking, maybe we need to go back to the days where we start handing out USBs, because it seems like a lot of people found Linux.
I mean, people would appreciate the USB part for sure, but I thought you were going to say handing out CDs. I'm like, I don't think that's going to work.
Hey, CDs are going to make a comeback.
Or I started out with floppy disks.
I didn't actually have a PC of my own, but I had a key to the sort of senior lab on the campus.
Nice.
And so at about 10 o'clock at night, I snuck up there and I basically started trying to learn Linux. I was having a blast and suddenly realized that it was 5 o'clock in the morning and I only had sort of 2 hours to get Windows back on the PC. Otherwise, I'd be caught. So
I love that. A little bit of a hacker story there.
Yeah.
Mark. Yeah, I love it. How did this lead you to founding Canonical? So you got this Linux, on a disk, you tried it out. You obviously were blown away by the generosity. How did that lead you to eventually, I know there's a lot in between, but I guess the big milestones that led you to founding Canonical?
Well, so I was really interested in the internet. I was interested in how the internet would change society, how it would change business, and in the early '90s, mid '90s, it was kind of the beginning of the .com explosion, right, and the sense of transformation of everything because of the internet, in Cape Town, I didn't have any money. I was watching what was happening in Silicon Valley, but I didn't have any money and no access to it. And we didn't really have any bandwidth either. So most of the sort of obvious business models were precluded. But I was really interested in security and cryptography. And so I built a business called Thought, which really specialized in enabling the sort of verification of the identity of businesses. This is before Let's Encrypt. And things made it sort of much more widely available, and rightly so. And that business did very well. I sold it towards the end of the .com rush, and so I found myself kind of just in this extraordinary position. Right, I was very, very wealthy, and I genuinely wanted to sort of think carefully about what I wanted to do. What could I do that would have an impact on others? And it seemed to me that open source was this amazing gift to the world by thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but it was somehow not reaching people. And I thought, there must be millions of innovators, inventors, creators, engineers, coders, entrepreneurs out there who would go further faster if they got Linux, and maybe I could just make it easier for them to do that. I had kind of battled through it. And Debian, was a bit of a beast in those days. So I thought, well, why not build a team that really understands Debian? I was still a Debian developer. I only kind of moved to sort of alumni status fairly recently. But why not build a team that really understood Debian with a specific focus of bringing it to the world, right? And that became Ubuntu.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's
amazing.
That's fantastic, and also it's kind of like an interesting thing about my history too correlates to that team being built because I started with Linux in the like 1999, but I didn't really stay with Linux. I basically dabbled here and there, and I played with Debian and Mandrake, and then when Ubuntu was announced as becoming a project, I was super excited, and it got me back into using Linux, and then eventually it became my primary desktop and experience because of the stuff you did with that team that you were creating with Debian. So, I mean, I on behalf of a lot of people, thank you for making Ubuntu.
Really?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That we have to pass those thanks on to a lot of people as well, right?
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure.
It's a big effort, both from my colleagues at Canonical and just an incredible community. You met some of them in Prague, I think.
Oh yes, it was fantastic. I also met quite a few in the Scale event that happened recently as well. So when you look at how Linux and open source has grown since the founding of Canonical, what do you think is like the most exciting for you? And also, is there anything that you're concerned about?
Well, so first, it's very satisfying to see the spread of free software. I like the term free software. I think it's important. I think open source is important too, but I think the freedom and free is important, and certainly motivated me to be part of it. You know what I really love is the combination of modern Linux and Raspberry Pis. Right, I love this idea that for very little hard money, a student or an entrepreneur anywhere in the world can get this incredible gateway to the world's knowledge as code. And I think we're really only at the beginning of how that's going to change the world, right? That combination
Absolutely.
of incredibly accessible, low energy compute and just enormous range of software. The acceleration curve in the number of open source projects is just awesome, right? It's kind of Wikipedia for software. It's just incredible.
Yeah.
I think it's a great time to be into software. It's a great time to be into technology, and it's exciting every year to see what gets made. In terms of concerns, not really. I think there has always been a bit of a hard bargain at the heart of open source, right? Like the Stallman bargain was pretty brutal, right? It was, you can use this software, but then you're going to give all of your software away as well. And that's, I think, necessary. There's got to be a bit of a tough give and get there in order to ensure that the snowball keeps snowballing. And I think right now there's a lot of agonizing over the relationship between open source community and the clouds. I'm really not worried about that because I think in the end the clouds actually have a motivation to join the open source community. And I think some of the licenses that have been crafted specifically to address this issue are almost antagonistic. So that's a bit of a concern. I think that's a bit of overshoot effectively. On the other hand, I'm not at all concerned about Copilot and AI and the sort of training of AI on software. I don't think learning is copying, right? It'll take a decade or two for that to work through various courts. But my gut feel is that actually it's quite right for us to be using the corpus of open source in order to create kind of next generation software intelligence. That's exactly the sort of thing that I think open source is all about. So we'll see.
Oh, awesome, Mark. And the Ubuntu community is known, for its passion and enthusiasm. How does Canonical foster and engage with the community, and what role does the community play in shaping the direction of the company?
We have always believed that Ubuntu is bigger than Canonical's view of Ubuntu, right? That it's important to make space for people who have a different vision, whether that's a different desktop environment, the Kubuntu folks, the Mate folks, the LXQT folks. There's any number of different spins on the Linux desktop experience, or whether that's kind of specialisms, high performance computing or medicine or education, specialisms like that. So I think it's very important for us to invest in that, make that possible, make sure that our processes support people who have their own vision of what a distribution could be for, to build that within the structure, the superstructure that is Ubuntu. And I hope we can continue to kind of stay open-minded about almost what a distribution is in order to attract people who have their own ideas. So I think that's very important. There are things that have come out of that community process that have become very important to Canonical. So it genuinely is in our interests, I think, to maintain that dialogue and to kind of keep the doors open for folks. Quite excited now that we're reanimating the Ubuntu Summit.
Yeah, awesome.
I hope that will become sort of a focal point for people who have a 10, 20-year vision for open source to meet each other and to make sure that Ubuntu serves their needs.
Oh yeah, it was a great experience to go to the summit, like the inaugural Ubuntu Summit, I guess, and it was fantastic. I wish I could go this year, but I have a conflict, which is unfortunate. But it was a fantastic experience, and anybody who is in the area and wants to go definitely should.
And the community's got to be, and we deal with this even doing a podcast in open source in Linux. The community is unbelievably supportive and amazing and loving in so many ways, and that's the majority. But there's a lot of harshness that comes because people are very passionate about open source and Linux as well. And I know Ubuntu is no stranger to that. I remember that the moment I came into Linux for the first time, Ubuntu was what got me to switch from Windows to Linux. And like you, Mark, I was interested in it from a security privacy standpoint. And I was in Windows doing videos on YouTube about that. And someone left a comment like, hey, if you like security and privacy, you should check out Linux. And that led me to Ubuntu for the first time. So how do you deal with that, kind of balancing all of that harsh criticism? Because I know when I went in Ubuntu and made those Ubuntu videos, I got a lot of people, some of those critics were the first trolls to kind of show up and things. So how do you balance between people who are just very passionate and then all of the kind of harsh criticisms and things that come with having a very popular desktop environment or distro, I should say?
It is a difficult thing, right? I think ultimately all of us depend on the courage that individuals have to be different of one form or another. Like any sort of progress essentially looks a little alien, looks a little weird, right? And so the idea that if one has an idea that is different, one's going to have to not only kind of deal with trying to shape that and make it real, but also deal with just tons of criticism is unfortunate. I think genuinely it costs us in the community, and I would encourage people to tamp down that sort of toxicity. When someone creates open source, it takes nothing away from you, right?
Yes,
it takes nothing away from you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the idea that people should get yelled at and abused just because they're building something that's a bit different, I think is really hurtful, really, really terrible. For us, it was really astonishing during the sort of the big push that we made around Unity, where we had the strong sense that the consumer world was changing, and for the first time, free software might have a chance to be right there at the forefront, in your pocket, on your laptop, on a tablet, who knows where else. And we had lots of challenges. I mean, we made lots of mistakes. I think technically we made lots of mistakes. Socially, we made mistakes. But it seemed like an unnecessary burden to have to kind of try to do that. It was genuinely a gift to free software, and be sort of virulently abused for making the effort, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I think everybody who has a voice in open source should use that to remind people that we can't tell what the future looks like, and something that's a bit different today might turn out to be really, really useful tomorrow.
We miss Unity.
Yeah.
by the way.
Actually, yeah, I was planning to
Yeah.
ask you about it because, as a personal favor, I'd like to see it be brought back to be like to the main thing because it was one of my favorite DEs
There are
ever.
community members who still continue to nurture it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I feel very grateful to both GNOME, KDE, and the desktop environments that, we were able to continue with Ubuntu, even though Canonical at that stage hit a real wall with what it could invest in Unity. It was a tough time. It was a tough lesson for me. Sometimes wanting to make it happen isn't enough. So thank you for the nudge. We do try to kind of bring some of the thinking there to GNOME, and I think it's good where we can find those points of collaboration and commonality. But who knows? Right now, our focus has been to kind of try and reach some other areas of compute. I think it's very important to understand what's going on in IoT. Like, I think if you really want to enable people to change their lives and their surroundings, IoT is quite a meaningful way to do that, right? We live in the real world, and IoT is all about kind of adding something software driven to the real world, or whether that's in your home, at the office, at the factory, kind of in the car, doesn't matter. So I think that's been really, really interesting to be investing in that and enabling people to do interesting stuff there. And also on the cloud, right? Like the whole notion of software on the cloud is so different, so interesting. So those have been kind of our key focus areas over the last couple of years. I hope to kind of return to consumer compute, and who knows what we could do.
We want that too, because when I still to this day boot up Unity, there's a nostalgia. Like, I can only explain it like when I was a kid and my favorite toy was He-Man. Seeing He-Man toy, that's what the nostalgia of seeing Unity is like for me, because that was a pivotal moment that changed my life. I ended up on this podcast. I ended up being able to talk about open source and security and privacy and all those things. Unity was my first experience in Linux. So yeah, maybe one day we'll get Unity back. No pressure.
Still miss the HUD.
Yes.
Yeah, we like the HUD.
Well, this question comes, speaking of community, from one of our patrons who wanted us to ask you about your partnership with hardware companies. They wanted to know what partnerships exist today, and are there plans to expand others in the future? And by others, I specifically mean a Framework Ubuntu branded laptop.
So that is such a great idea. To speak to it, today our three biggest partners are Dell, HP, Lenovo in alphabetical order. And we have also certified a number of pieces of hardware. We are working to really build a super high quality certification capability. I think it's really important if you buy a laptop that has Linux pre-installed, I think you should be able to use that laptop for 10 years and know that it's going to get kernel security updates every week or every 2 weeks and never break. But nobody can actually make that possible today, right? So we're building a giant lab, and we are going to put 4 of everything we've ever certified into that lab. And we're going to make sure that we run that hardware with the latest kernel, with the latest graphics stack, with the latest NVIDIA drivers, Intel drivers, in order to kind of both optimize frame rates and performance and so on over time, and address security updates, and know that thing is going to be in tip-top condition for its full life. So that's a huge project. I'm really excited to be kind of getting that underway. It's got a phenomenal team driving it. And my goal there is to make people feel like Linux is just a first-class consumer-grade platform that they can completely bank on. You can now go to I think all 3 vendors, Dell, HP, and Lenovo, and you can get Ubuntu pre-installed on a significant range of their laptops and PCs. And I think that's a huge leap forward. I think they're mainly motivated by the kind of advanced developer crowd and data science crowd. Those are obviously very high spec machines, but they also offer Ubuntu on sort of essentially a representative sample of the range. So I think that's huge progress. 2004, that seemed a long way away. It's kind of amazing that now it's real. Framework is hot.
Yes.
In Prague
Yes.
Engineering Summit, there were a bunch of very proud framework toting colleagues.
Absolutely.
And they were sort of the envy of the Engineering Summit. So let me see if we can do something about that for
I
you.
love it.
That'd be amazing.
Yay.
Yes.
So let's pivot to something else that Canonical has made that is kind of game changing, and that's the Snap packages. So do you think that the Snap package criticism the community offers are justified? I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff that the Snaps do, and I am a huge fan of the Snaps in the server side of things, that they make things so easy in a lot of configurations, especially like Nextcloud went from being a big pain to just one command now. And that is something that is game changing to me. But there are some criticisms for Snaps. Do you think that there's credibility in those?
Yeah, very much so. So, hold on.
Doggo.
We have
Hey,
another
puppy.
special guest.
Yay.
Mark's puppy came in.
A special guest. I like it.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think that, this is the difficulty about innovating on a platform that people love and use very heavily, right? On the one hand, we're completely obliged to innovate, right? If we don't innovate, then essentially we go stale, we let everybody down. On the other hand, every time you're stepping up to do something significant, it will take quite a long time to go from sort of the initial idea through sort of early implementations all the way to you've polished that thing perfectly. And the desktop is almost the hardest place to kind of deliver, because people rightly like they want everything perfect in their desktop. And to make a desktop secure and fast, you really need complex integration between all of the components. So the desktop is actually a very complicated software construct compared to sort of a piece of server software, which is typically designed to kind of, do its own thing in a box. So the tricky thing for me is that on the one hand, I absolutely believe in what we're doing with Snaps. I think we're making a construct for Linux applications which will be more portable across distributions. And I really believe this. The underlying technology that Snaps bring, I believe, sets up for much more interoperability across distros. I think it's more secure. I mean, the language that defines the sandbox is really, really robust. And the processes that underpin the reviews and so on that go into those apps are really, really robust. So I absolutely believe in it. On the other hand, I think some of the things that people have criticized are dead right. They're absolutely spot on. It's irritating if things pop up and warn you that they need to be updated and you've got 14 days to do it. It's irritating if you don't have all the control over that you would like to have. So I empathize with the frustrations, and I understand the kind of origin of the concerns. It's a little difficult when some of the criticism is trollish. That's just unpleasant and unfortunate for the people working to kind of create that future. But it's not as though they aren't, wrong, right? Like there are bugs, there were performance issues. We did have kind of like frustrating, the confinement, while robust, is also kind of irritating when you need to kind of push the boundaries of the box. All of those things are real. We're going to fix them. And that's really the thing that I've learned, is that if you really believe in something, you have to be willing to kind of walk through that. You have to walk through the troll fire and get to where you believe you can get to. And I try to motivate the team behind Snapd and Snaps to understand, how important their work is, not just for IoT, not just for servers, but ultimately for consumers and desktop engineers as well. Hopefully that anyone who's watching, hopefully that sets your mind at ease. We're not ignoring the issues. We're just very, very carefully building the absolute best infrastructure for distributing applications that we possibly can.
The number one criticism outside of the speed, which I know there's been a ton of work to improve, and we've seen that improve every single release, is the fact that people are concerned that because of the server side infrastructure, that this is kind of Canonical's way of, I don't know, forcing Microsofting, if you will, the old Microsofting some things so that they kind of have complete control of this developer app, because it's one of the biggest things. And I don't mean this to be a gotcha question. What is your response, though, to that? Because I see it everywhere. It's like the server side's not truly open source. That's what they're saying. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's good to be skeptical, right? I think you've always got to be sort of asking what's the worst that could happen under these circumstances. There are really two different issues. One is the store itself and the code behind the store. And the important thing I think to understand there is that the protocol that the desktop talks to the store is super simple. I mean, the desktop literally says, here I am, this is what I've got installed, what should I do? And the store says, well, I think you should do this, right? So that protocol is super simple. And so there have, in fact, at various times been open source implementations of that protocol, which we haven't been stressed about at all. In fact, that's nice. I think if we were to make that protocol much more complicated, then it would be a bigger issue effectively, because you'd wonder, well, is the complexity of that, does that prevent and preclude other implementations of the protocol? The second issue is the kind of control issue, and that's a difficult one. In reality, if you want people not to have to make all the choices that are relevant for security of an application, so you get a webcam application. Should it have access to the camera? Yeah, it should have access to the camera. Should the user be prompted to give it access to the camera? Probably not, because at the end of the day, you're just teaching users to say yes, and that's the last thing you want to do, because then they'll say yes to the wrong thing, right? So there's quite a lot of responsibility that we take on in bringing applications into the store, where we review them and say, well, what is a reasonable set of permissions for this thing to get on your laptop? And that's real responsibility. If we screw that up, then that will have negative sort of consequences for people. And there's sort of no way to have a system where you can get software from anywhere and also get the benefits of having someone else provide that kind of review and scrutiny and so on. And that's got nothing to do with the source code of the store, right? That's literally just got to do with the digital signatures that say someone that you trust has looked through all of that and made these assertions effectively. So we do come back and sort of say, well, should we open source the store? It's a giant pile of code. Maybe we will. When we did that with Launchpad, all the people who were criticizing Launchpad for being open source or for being closed source had turned around and said, oh, we're not going to use it anyway. So I was sort of like, well,
right.
Thanks for stepping up when we did. So I've never been particularly motivated to do that. And I don't think the team is particularly anxious about it either.
Gotcha.
Aww.
I appreciate you answering that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark, I think, the immutable systems will be the future in Linux. That just seems to be where we're going. And you were ahead of that game with Snaps. Mm-hmm. And what are some of the things you're looking to enhance with Snaps in the near future?
So a lot of work in the Snap ecosystem is now focused on improving the user experience on the desktop. And that really has to do with thinking about the sandbox that an application is in and how to give the user the ability to influence that sandbox, so that essentially they can ask for their software to do things that on the face of it would be like a bad idea from a security point of view. So there's a lot of kind of work in the full security stack, from kind of kernel, LSM type work all the way up to the GUI, to facilitate that kind of user control. We continue to do a bunch of work on the IoT front. So essentially making it easier for people to make very small devices that do a couple of things, and can evolve over time with no kind of direct human involvement at all. So that is a key focus for us. For the rest, they kind of work. It's sort of amazing. I worry about deb updates, right? We ran a survey where people let us kind of see what was on their machines, and 70% hadn't done deb updates in a year. So
Michael would have been part of that 70%
Yes.
mark, unfortunately.
I would not be in
we
that
do all of
list.
this work. We do all of this work to make those security updates available.
I would
And,
absolutely not be in that list. I mean, if it said 2 years, then probably I'd be in that list.
I know, right?
But, one of the things that I like about snaps that people always complained about is it was funny to me. Like, would complain about it being auto updating stuff, and I was like, "Thanks, yeah, that's great."
Yeah.
That's
What's the
exactly
problem?
what Michael needs.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we had a security update in, like, a bad one in some software that's very widely done, and 90% were updated within 24 hours.
Wow.
I love that. I think
That's
that's so good.
awesome. Amazing.
We had a bad security issue in Snapd itself, and again, 90% were fixed before the news officially broke. Right, so.
Just to tell people why this is so important, that 90% is so impressive, is this is a benchmark, especially in the mobile market, in which Apple and Google and others utilize for security. And it's one of the ways that Android, honestly, has been so far behind from a security standpoint. Not that if you're updating, you would be secure, but they have such a hard time getting people to update, and or the manufacturers themselves stop providing updates in an Android ecosystem that are pushed down, and so many people are sitting there with unpatched vulnerabilities on their stuff. So being able to say, hey, when we released a security patch, 90% of the people were able to adopt it is huge. That's massive. That's a big deal for securing, keeping the people who are using your product secure. So that's
it's incredible how much of our lives is now digital, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is that we want to run software that we shouldn't trust. Like, think about it. Every time you see a cool thing, you've got to ask yourself, well, how much do I actually trust it? And it was that idea that really, really got me motivated to invest in Snaps early on. I was like, well, if we bring Linux to where we want it to be, kind of like just a platform that lots of people use and feel good about using and don't have to agonize over using, well, then they're going to have a lot of software at their fingertips that maybe they should only trust for something specific.
Right.
And we need to change the way we think about the whole system. The early open source days, were kind of beautiful. There were lots of reasons why you could generally trust everything on the system, right? And we do some things in that regard by making sure that the system is all open source and it's all built on systems that we trust and so on. But if we're successful, then people are going to be running Ubuntu or other distros and just saying, yeah, I want to run that app, or I want to run that app. And that's great. I think we're in an era now where there are good reasons to believe that any cool new software that comes out for your phone or your tablet could actually target Linux as well. A lot of the new development environments are cross-platform, multi-platform. And if that's true, well, then we need that kind of sandboxing and that kind of security.
Absolutely.
And just the accessibility of being able to put it on multiple different distros is also another factor, because it's a way to convince developers who are interested in doing a Linux version, but they're not willing to make that commitment. It's less of a commitment when they have a universal format to be able to focus on, rather than a different deb for each version of whatever distribution that's Debian based, or an RPM that's different between Fedora and OpenSUSE, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, being able to focus on that is very important. And I just want to clear up one thing. I do update stuff. It's just my media
is not
production.
The time, Michael.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The media production machine is the one I don't update to make sure everything is working.
We're clear,
And,
Michael.
Yeah,
We're
I just want to.
good.
I just want to clarify that one.
Yeah,
that one
good job.
piece. Yeah, everything else gets updated. And also I need to start updating that one too. But anyway, the next question is also from our patrons. And does Canonical have any plans to add Btrfs as an option during install of Ubuntu?
So I really like the work that the Btrfs folks are doing. File systems are kind of life's work. If you want to write a file system, it is going to take 20 years, 30 years. Yeah. And I remember back in 2004, the early kind of discussion around Btrfs. I think Chris Mason was the kind of visionary behind it, and I think, to his credit, he's still kind of working on it at Facebook now. So it's quite plausible. I'm pretty sure that our server installer does support it. I doubt that the desktop installer does. It would be interesting if you ran a poll and got some sort of indication for us as to how many people would like that.
We could do that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a poll
ZFS
on this show, and that's 3 so far. That 3 of 3.
Yeah.
100%.
100%. Exactly.
What my understanding is that it has improved substantially, ButterFS, but that it's still a bit fragile. That the failure modes are complex.
Well, it's interesting because ButterFS to me is when it first started getting talked about, there were so many people who were just destroying it when you would mention it, like, oh, it's terrible, it can't recover, this is the worst file system ever. It was unbelievable. We would mention it on the show, and the amount of feedback we would get of people just telling us like, oh, stay. And then it just like changed. And there was a high development that started going into like super speed into the development and fixing some of those. And now there's this huge fan base behind ButterFS. And I can't help but make the connection between Unity kind of in the same way. All of these people beating up on it. And then all of a sudden when it's gone, everybody's like, hey, I really want it. Of course, ButterFS isn't gone. We don't want it to be, a lot of people want it to be adopted. But it is interesting to see the life cycle sometimes of open source, because ButterFS was one that was very hated when it first got talked about, and now people really want it, which is kind of cool to see, I think.
It's an interesting way of thinking about, like, maybe there's just time for people to adopt it in a society aspect of something. So like initially people don't like change, so they hate on it. And then once they start actually using it, they begin to like it. Like Unity is a great example of that, because in the very early stages of people, they first try it, the first version it comes out, which wasn't really ready. It was in the netbook edition. And they're bashing on it. It's like, it's literally the first version, and you're saying that it's unusable. And then within 2 releases, it became like super solid, and I used it for years. And then people were talking about how they would never use it. It's not worth it, and blah, blah. And then I asked them, well, have you ever tried it? No. Well, then how do you have an opinion if you've never tried it?
Yeah.
Not just an opinion, a loud one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, coming back to ButterFS, I think it's quite plausible we could add it as an option on the desktop. And I think you're right that both ButterFS and ZFS change almost how you have to think about the file system, and so that makes them challenging, right? Like they feel a little bit hostile at first, just because the things that you normally do, the things that normally tell you where you're at, aren't telling you the whole story, right? And there's layers and layers that you now have to understand behind that. One thing that I'd be a bit reluctant to do is I'd be reluctant to sort of build user experience capabilities around ButterFS, because then that kind of creates a fork in the road where the whole desktop environment now is dependent on particular features in a file
That's
system.
interesting.
So that would be sort of something I'd have to think about very carefully. So think time machine type capabilities, right? Backup and rollback type capabilities. They're cool, but they feel a little fragile if they're done in the intricacies of the insides of a file system.
Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier, and I want to bring it back because it's a topic on everyone's mind, and I think people would be very interested to kind of get a little bit more deep into this subject, your thoughts on it. And that's AI. What are your thoughts on this trend, and how do you see AI being leveraged at Canonical in the future?
Super interesting. We just had an engineering summit, so we get, 500-600 people to go to some interesting part of the world. And we do this every 6 months. There's a structured agenda. Obviously, every team is working on their kind of focus points, and then there's cross-team time, and then there's kind of play time, fun time, and AI was a big part of that, right? So lots of teams looking at how we can use AI for example, in quality. So how can we understand some of the huge amounts of data that we generate just inside our own labs, looking at sort of big deployments of desktops or OpenStack or private cloud type infrastructure, analytics databases. How can we use ML to kind of tune the performance of databases, for example? People looking at, there are real questions being asked about the ethics of actually writing software using AI, and the derivation questions there. At this stage, we can certainly say that this is a moment in the same way that the internet itself was a moment, right? Like it's a profound shift in what people think software can do. I'm not convinced that I'd like to be running a lot of code that was written by AI, because good people are better at creating code than reviewing code. And when you have an AI writing code for you, you're essentially perpetually reviewing, right? And our current feeling is that, at least for the moment, it would be a bad idea to have teams using AI as the primary kind of mechanism of creation. But the pace of improvement is just unbelievable. It's very exciting. Who knows? Yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, I love the idea of having an AI check my work, because I want to do the programming myself, but there's always some project that I'm working on, and probably every single one of them I've ever created, where I'm frustrated for hours and hours trying to find the one stupid semicolon that I can't find because it's not there and it's broken everything, and I could just parse it through an AI and it just, oh, you missed this part. Like that sounds awesome. And if you apply that towards programming, I think that's a great way of doing AI.
People always say pair programming is better, right? So why not pair program with an AI?
Yes, there you go.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's interesting, your link to AI and the internet, because I've very much made the same connection myself. Of there was a time when the internet was becoming popular, but it hadn't been adopted by everyone. Where I remember people at work being blown away by my ability to query something and get a really good result back.
Yes.
Right? Like they were just blown away by
Google
this Google foo. And then years later, everyone was able to utilize it with no hiccup. And when people talk about it replacing jobs and things, at least at this juncture, I think a lot of it's going to be, there were also people I remember in the workplace who kind of refused to adopt the internet to utilize it as a tool with their work.
Yeah.
And they fell behind. And I feel like AI very much at this juncture is something that I think if people don't start familiarizing themselves with and understand the right way to ask questions to AI, to utilize it and leverage it, they'll probably fall behind. But I'm not as fearful as everyone else that AI suddenly is going to replace everyone's jobs. But with that said, I'm curious, a lot of experts out there disagree with me, and they're asking for AI development to be paused for 6 months to kind of understand more what's going on. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think it is different to the emergence of the internet, because the internet was fundamentally about connecting people together, and it led to just extraordinary shifts in what people could organize and how you could organize businesses and nonprofits or activist groups, social groups. So, you know what I mean? Like we just have seen the world, like the internet allowed us to harness our minds in a fundamentally different way. And I think AI is not the same. I think AI is something of a threat to certain kinds of tasks and function. Historically, people always found more interesting things to do when there was a tool that made something easier or faster or entirely automated. People found more interesting things to do. To me, it's not unreasonable to ask if this is the end of an era. I really think something like the kind of Western consensus capitalism view of the world is an era. Everything is an era, right?
Sure.
So then the question is, well, how else might we organize ourselves? And when might it become optimal to move to a different kind of way of organizing ourselves? I'm dancing a little around the issue. I don't kind of want to be out there saying it's the end of capitalism as we know it. I wouldn't miss it particularly, to be clear. But I do think it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
I think we should be open to the idea that there are other ways for us to organize ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't know that everybody needs to be gainfully employed, right? For us to build functioning societies and kind of be good to each other. Now that's complicated stuff, so I'm going to sort of pull back a little bit from the edge of that and just say it's really interesting. Just remember, when the Terminator robots come, their eyes will be glowing orange, right?
Orange.
That's so cool,
Nice.
Mark.
I was about to ask you a Skynet related question.
That was
That was
awesome.
perfect.
Michael wrote it down. I have a follow-up to mention Skynet right when you said that there, Mark. So that's, perfect timing.
Yeah.
As a Trekkie, I feel like there's got to be a point in time where we get to the
why is it always Skynet and Terminator that the future always holds rather than Star
about
Trek?
the Borg. We can't forget about the
why
Borg.
are you guys in 2 dimensions and not in a holodeck?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Mark, I wanted to get back a little bit to Snaps, because something that was so cool is I saw your awesome keynote, Open Source in the World of App Stores, at the Southern California Linux Expo Scale 14X in January of 2016. And there you made the exciting public announcement about the new containerized software called Snaps. So that was when we all found out about it.
And also, just a side note, I just want to say that that's a good name for the application format, because there's a snap for that. That was a good name. Yeah. Just wanted to say that.
So that was just really cool. So, Mark, when you look back at all the things Canonical has accomplished, what are you most proud of?
That's interesting. Surviving, honestly. If it, with the sort of heady exuberance of youth, I thought, look, I don't want to do a charity. I don't want to do something that essentially is unsustainable. Building operating systems, is sort of the most gnarly kind of software. There's other software that might be harder in some places and so on, but there may be other kinds of software that require like particular sorts of vision that I don't have. But operating systems are just gnarly. You know what I mean? They're huge and complicated, and everything's changing all the time. And you can only be responsible for so much of it, but you've got to ship all of it. So doing something as big and gnarly as that. And knowing that we were going to give it away for free, because otherwise, why should we do it, right? There were other people who were already selling Linux. I wanted to be able to sort of figure out how to give it away for free. I knew that I needed a business model for that. The original idea was essentially Netflix, Dropbox, Spotify, paid services for your free operating system. I failed completely at that. It was just too complicated to build a Linux. We just didn't have time or money to go after those other things. And it turned out you could do those things. You wouldn't get crushed by the sort of hegemony of Windows if you did those things, because actually phones arrived, and so suddenly it was a multi-platform world anyway. So long story short, we found ourselves with an operating system that everybody loved.
Yes.
And no real business model. In about like 2012 to 2013, it started to become clear for me. And I felt a real obligation to Ubuntu users to fight through that and find a way to keep Ubuntu sustainable in the world. It took a lot of courage for the team. I think my team knew that we were up against the wall. I had to kind of grind through it. It was very scary. But I really sort of salute the members of my team, both community and Canonical, who stuck with it. And so to get to a place now where we really can say, okay, there is a customer base for Ubuntu. We do more and more in the free version of Ubuntu, and I'm really proud of that. But there is a customer base there. That means that if I get hit by a bus, the world can expect others to continue with that. I think that's kind of meaningful, and I'm really proud to have done that. and of the
Absolutely.
team that helped do it, right?
Yeah, very much so. And we all got to remember that Ubuntu 4.10 Warthog was the first ever officially released version of Ubuntu, and it was released in October of 2004, 18 years ago. Oh my
Amazing.
gosh.
Yeah.
And it was so progressive for its time it was released. It had an easy to use graphical installer and GNOME user interface that your average user could get Linux up and running with. And it was the distro I could recommend to my students to install and use, and I always enjoyed hearing the sounds of the drums when their computers boot.
Right? Yes.
I always love that sound. It's nostalgic to me. And, honestly, Ubuntu made Linux accessible for the everyday user and brought Linux to the world. It's just amazing.
This is
Lot
kind
to
of a
be
silly
proud of.
thing to tell you because I don't think I've ever told Ryan or Jill this actually, but it reminded me about the drums and stuff like that. Reminded me that when I first got into like using Ubuntu on a daily, I was dual booting with Windows and Ubuntu, and I liked Ubuntu so much that I customized the theme and the look of Windows to be Ubuntu
How
at
funny.
the time.
Yeah.
So when I was switching, it felt like the same. And I was like, and it's always missing something, so I'd switch back and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I had
Window
a friend.
blinds.
I had a friend who was like, "Why don't you just use Ubuntu then?" I was like, "Yeah, that's a good point."
Maybe I should.
Oh, and also, Mark, I actually have a family history linked to NASA. My grandparents were rocket scientists for the Apollo missions. And I have to ask, what is being in space like?
Wow. It's a dream. It really is.
Oh.
It's incredibly peaceful. If you close your eyes, you just have this extraordinary sort of sense of floating that it's just kind of wonderful. If you've ever been kind of snorkeling or scuba diving,
Yeah.
it's similar but without all the water.
Oh, yeah.
So sort of getting up there is amazing. The thing that's really amazing about that sort of experience, though, is kind of the camaraderie, the teamwork that you develop with a crew. I was kind of in Star City over the year before that, working with that crew under kind of stressful circumstances, but you just kind of develop a really kind of tight bond. When I look back on the whole experience, it was as much about what happened on the ground as it was about that sort of like that
How interesting.
that feeling of being
Aw.
safe. The other thing that I remember really clearly is just thinking that, when you see the atmosphere, you see how thin it is, right? Like if that's the planet, the atmosphere is like this thin little layer on it. And everything in history, like everything that we've ever kind of like argued about or learned or discovered, everything in history happened in that tiny little thin layer. And that's sort of extraordinary, right? The rest of space seems kind of sterile.
Yeah.
Really made me sort of want us to do better with what we have, right?
Absolutely.
So I try to surround myself with greenery, and
I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
I got
Yeah.
goosebumps
Yeah.
when
I
you
know.
said that. That was
That's
beautiful.
it made me
Yeah.
think about the idea, like when people look up at the stars and they feel how insignificant they are. The idea of being able to look back and think about all of the history of everything that we are aware of is here, and the rest
Protected by this little thin.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a
it's
little thin
just-
layer. Oh my gosh. Have you thought about going back, Mark?
I'd love to. We're still kind of sitting around, Earth orbit. So, I'm pretty sure in the next decade or so, we're going to be pushing our horizons further out, and it would be wonderful to be part of that. And one day, who knows? Get old and cranky. People may want to send me on a one-way ticket. Really.
I know.
That'd be something.
Yeah. So, Mark, you have survived our gauntlet of questions, and this has been an absolute amazing interview. But we do have one more section left. Don't worry, it's very quick. We call it the lightning round, and the goal here is we're just going to ask you some simple questions, and you answer it as quick as you can. The first thing that comes to your mind there. And just to give you an example of how simple it is, the first question: what's your favorite snack?
What's my favorite? Chocolate.
Perfect.
What was your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Superman.
Nice.
Nice.
Are you a gamer? And if so, what is your favorite game?
Paper toss.
Nice. A musician or band everyone needs to experience.
Sia.
Nice, yeah. If you only could choose one or the other, and it doesn't matter what configuration, any type of flavor, it doesn't matter. Cupcake or muffin, which one would you choose?
Muffin.
Boom, got you, Ryan.
Darn it.
What is the first app you install on a new computer?
Vim.
You're going to make a lot of fans with that one.
Yeah.
I sort of already asked this, but I wanted to just to kind of put it out there. As a big fan of Unity and as a personal favor to me, is there any chance we could have Unity come back to the main edition of Ubuntu?
There is a small chance.
I'll take it.
I'll take the chance. And finally, your personal go-to desktop environment.
GNOME.
Beautiful. You passed.
Yay.
You passed the lightning round there. That was amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. It was it was a blast for sure.
Yeah.
It was a total pleasure. I think you guys, you made this a real a fun experience. Jill, that collection is spectacular.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited to have you on. You are actually one of my heroes in Linux, and I was so excited to talk to you today.
She about jumped out of her skin.
Yeah, when I found
Yeah.
out you were coming on, I've been planning this whole week, and I have been, using Ubuntu LTS on my podcasting rig here in my studio since I started podcasting in 2018. And Ubuntu is my go-to distro for testing and using new builds, and even to test some older computers I have in my vintage computer collection. And it is the distro that truly made me excited for the future of Linux. This led to my career in podcasting here on Destination Linux and my work with the Linux Chicks of Los Angeles and the Southern California Linux Expo. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming, and you are an amazing person to look up to.
Do you know that that's exactly why I think it's worth doing? That people like you and your students and other people essentially can figure out things that make the world a better place, right?
Yeah.
So,
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for all the many years of work. Thank you to your team and all those you put together, the contributions the Canonical have delivered. We really appreciate your time, and I hope we can have you back, and I promise we won't make you sit here for 59 minutes answering questions next time. We just had a lot to get out this time, Mark. We had a lot for you. But thank you so much for going through that gauntlet. We appreciate it.
so fun. You're most welcome. Stay well.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
So what an amazing episode. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Mark. I know all three of us did. We've been talking
Amazing.
about it ever since it was over, and the patrons actually get to hear us talking about some of that. That's one of the reasons why you should become a patron. So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we love your faces. You can come join us on Discord at tuxdigital.com/Discord. We recorded this on a different day, Saturday, and you know how our patrons knew what room to jump in and join? It was because they're in the Discord patron chat there. So if you want to watch the show live, become patron of Destination Linux, and you could watch this interview live and see all kinds of different events and things that we have. So join us on Discord, become a patron, do all those cool things. Do it now. I felt like a commercial right there, so I had to do it now.
And there's more. Or in addition to watching live, that's just one of the awesome perks that you get. You also can when you become a patron, you can join us in the patron-only post show that happens every week after the show. And if you're not able to watch it live, that's okay. You can still get all of the content because we have the unedited version of the show available to patrons. So you get all of the great content and any of the extra bonus stuff that we do in the show that doesn't make it into the actual show, like in between segments and stuff like that. So go become a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute, and you can get all of these perks and more. And more. Because there's also, it's not just patron of Destination Linux. You're also becoming a patron of Tux Digital itself. So everything, every show perk is available to you by
Even
going to Tux Digital.
hardware addicts, like
Even
the show
hardware
that's
addicts,
back
yes.
right now.
It is
Yeah.
back. In fact, episode 75 was just released yesterday. So go check it out. And it was fantastic. If you have been missing your fix for hardware and dad jokes, check out Hardware Addicts because we have both of those for you in that episode.
Nice.
And also go right now to tuxdigital.com/store. And you can check out all the great cool swag that we have, like t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, stickers, hats, and so much more. tuxdigital.com/store.
And make sure to check out all the awesome shows here on Tux Digital. We have the Pseudo Show, This Week in Linux, the DOS Geek Channel, Linux Out Loud, Hardware Addicts, GameSphere, and our virtual Linux user group, Linux Saloon. And make sure to head to tuxdigital.com and subscribe to all these awesome shows. And don't forget to leave a rating on your favorite app so others can discover the power of open source and keep those penguins marching in the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce. Everybody, have a great week. I know I am, because my birthday is on Monday, and the Mark Shuttleworth interview was my best present ever.
We
You're
did
welcome,
it, Michael.
Jill. We
so
totally planned this, although we actually didn't know, and it just perfectly landed up. So yeah, we're so good at giving gifts.
Yes, absolutely. And have a great week. And remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
To infinity
Woohoo!
and beyond.
And beyond.
Space reference.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
space Toy Story reference, technically, I guess.
Still space. It's
It's
spacey.
still space. Yeah.
Spacey.
See you next
All
week,
right.
everybody.
Bye-bye.